Welcome to Fictional History 101. I'm your fictional professor, Aaron Johnson. As usual, this class focuses on history within fiction. While today's subject will be different from our last, it does have some similarities to Mobile Suit Gundam. It's another long-running series that is widely known in Japan, while having relatively little exposure in the West. While Gundam focused on the tragedies of war, this series would, as its creator would say, be about the enigma of human beings. Today, I'd like to start our section on JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure began publication in 1987 in the Japanese magazine Shonen Jump. It stayed there for over 15 years until in 2004 it moved to Ultra Jump. Like Gundam, JoJo is a huge franchise, spanning 118 manga volumes, several novels, audio dramas, video games, an upcoming live-action movie, 2 different animated series, and even a collaboration with Gucci. While it would only become more widely known outside of Japan relatively recently, in Japan it is a juggernaut franchise. The manga is written by Hirohiko Araki, and follows the exploits of the Joestar family across its many generations. It takes many ideas and inspiration from classical works of art, such as the art of Paul Gauguin and Leonardo da Vinci. The series would also have many tributes to Western music. The series has many different themes and tones, and stretches from the late 1800s all the way to modern day. Each generation has their own issues to confront and resolve, which often is what lends the series the name JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Ranging from vampires to ancient mystical beings to magical spirits, there's a wide variety of allies and enemies spanning the Joestar family history. While there isn't as much sweeping history as, say, Gundam, there's still a winding path for us to take. Today's class will cover the first story arc, Phantom Blood, as well as touch on some other important things from Battle Tendency and Stardust Crusaders. Let's go back to before the Joestar family, to an event that would cast a long shadow over a span of nearly 100 years. Let's go back before JoJo's Bizarre Adventure begins, and start instead with a man from Italy. Our focus, Baron William Antonio Zeppeli. Born in 1838 in Italy to an archaeologist, Zeppeli had a love of the unknown. He sailed with his father's archaeological team across the world. On a trip to Mexico, they unearthed an Aztec stone mask. This stone mask would be used for a very grim and very dangerous ritual, though the Zeppeli group would not know this at the time. During the voyage home, William Zeppeli's father would put on the mask and put blood on it. When blood was added to the mask, long stone barbs would emerge from the back, puncturing the wearer's skull and piercing specific parts of the brain. While this would seem fatal, it would unlock a terrifying power within the wearer, changing them into a powerful vampire. Zeppeli's father would brutally murder the 58 members of the crew, tearing them apart with his bare hands before coming after his son. Knowing that he couldn't defeat the vampire, Zeppeli jumped into the ocean to escape. While his father pursued him, it bought Zeppeli enough time for the sun to rise, which would turn his father to ash. Seeing the horrifying creature that his father had become, Zeppeli vowed to destroy the mask and defeat any of the mask's creations. Around 1860, Zeppeli encountered a doctor. The man was capable of healing gangrenous limbs, using only a light that came from his hands. This would lead Zeppeli to Tibet, where he would spend the next 3 years under the tutelage of Master Tonpetty. His goal? To earn the art of Hamon, or ripple energy. This was a form of energy control that was older than human history, and was used to fight the creations of the stone mask in ancient times. It allowed humans to channel the power of sunlight through breathing, and would allow its user to inflict incredible damage on opponents, help to heal the human body, and even slow the aging process. During his training, Zeppeli would find that Hamon could even tell when a person would meet their death. With the knowledge of Hamon, Zeppeli set out to find the stone mask and end the danger it posed to humanity. While Zeppeli went in search of the mask, it would soon fall into the hands of a wealthy Englishman's family, the Joestar family. The head of the Joestar family, George Joestar, was a prolific businessman and noble. He held a modest fortune and a small estate, where he lived with his wife Mary and their newborn son Jonathan. The family acquired the stone mask that Zeppeli's father had uncovered in Mexico around 1868. Unfortunately, while traveling home by carriage, the Joestar family met with tragedy. During a heavy rain, the carriage tipped and fell down a slope. George Joestar would be knocked unconscious, while the carriage driver would be killed. Mary Joestar died protecting the infant Jonathan during the crash. Attracted by the sight of the crashed carriage came Dario Brando. Dario was a poor man living in England and hoped to make some money from looting the overturned carriage. In the wreck, Dario passed over the stone mask that Mary had obtained during her travels, instead looking for gold and jewelry. After Dario managed to pull one of the Joestar wedding rings off, George Joestar woke up. George mistook the looting Dario for someone who would come to his aid, and as he did not have any money on him, he offered him any one favor that Dario could ask for. After leaving the scene of the carriage accident, Dario attempted to pawn the stolen wedding ring in order to make some quick money. However, he was arrested when it was discovered the ring was stolen from the affluent George Joestar. As George Joestar felt that he had a life debt to Dario Brando, George went with the police to visit Dario, telling them that he had given the ring to Dario and that it was his to sell. George Joestar gave Dario some money, asking him to live an honest life. While Dario would use the money to start a business, it would not last long. Over the next 12 years, Dario would run his business into the ground, while his wife worked herself to exhaustion to provide for Dario and their child Dio. Dario's wife would work herself to death shortly after Dio was born. As Dio grew older, and his father struggled with alcoholism and illness, he would begin to take care of his father. He would play chess against patrons of a local bar for money. While he would face abuse and ridicule, this was still a means to earn money for the struggling Brando family. Even at home, he faced abuse from an increasingly alcoholic Dario. Sometime around 1880, Dio would realize that he could not take his father's abuse any longer. Dio would venture into the dangerous Ogre Street, a place renowned for its dangerous characters, in search of a solution. He would come to the shop of Wang Chan. Wang Chan ran a curiosity shop that sold many items, including poisons. Dio would purchase a particular poison and began giving it to his father, claiming it was medicine. As Dario neared death, he produced a letter to give to George Joestar. His letter asked that George take care of the young Dio. He asked his son to go live with George Joestar, hoping that he could steal the Joestar fortune, and wished for Dio to become the richest man on earth. Dario would die shortly afterwards. While Dio's early life had been a cold and abusive time, Jonathan had grown up with the luxuries of wealth. He lived in the Joestar estate, surrounded by serving staff, a loving father, and his dog Danny. While his father wished to groom him into a gentleman, Jonathan wanted little more than to adventure and explore the world around him. This would all change with the arrival of Dio. Dio came to the manor, bearing the letter his father had given to him. True to his word, George Joestar accepted the favor asked of him, and allowed Dio to live with him as an adopted son. Dio would waste little time trying to establish himself as the favorite of the family. He showed a gentlemanly manner around the house, while upstaging and belittling Jonathan in front of his friends. Dio would even show himself to be the more capable fighter of the two, besting Jonathan in a boxing match. Trying to best Jonathan in all things, he would come between Jonathan and a girl that he was interested in, Irina Pendleton, forcing a kiss from her before she could offer one to Jonathan. While Jonathan would weather Dio's insults and attempts to curry their father's favor, he wouldn't accept that Dio would cause harm to Irina. He confronted Dio over this and the two came to blows. While Dio proved he was still the better fighter, Jonathan's unwillingness to lose allowed him to overpower and beat Dio. Their father would intervene as Jonathan pummeled Dio and stopped the two. During their fighting, some of their blood would land on the stone mask that was displayed in the home, causing its barbs to emerge from the back. While Dio wouldn't think much of this, Jonathan would become fascinated by it. Shortly after their confrontation, Dio would arrange to have Jonathan's dog Danny secretly killed as revenge. He realized that he could not win in a direct confrontation with Jonathan, and that he would need to be much more subtle about winning over George Joestar's favor and breaking Jonathan's will. While Jonathan had no definitive proof that Dio had killed Danny, he suspected him almost immediately. The next 7 years would see a cooling of the rivalry between Dio and Jonathan. While Dio wouldn't view Jonathan as anything more than an obstacle, he outwardly portrayed a more friendly demeanor. Jonathan as well took on a more friendly relationship, although he did not forget the feud between himself and Dio 7 years earlier. In school, Dio began to pursue studies in law, while Jonathan followed an interest in archaeology. In 1888, as Jonathan and Dio were soon to graduate, George Joestar began to fall ill. Jonathan worked on caring for his father while also researching the stone mask his family owned. He would discover that whenever blood was applied to it, the stone barbs would emerge from the back of the mask. However, he could not discern the true nature of it. During his research, Jonathan came across the letter Dio had given to his father 8 years ago. In it, Dario had noted the symptoms of the illness that was ending his life, which Jonathan realized were the same as his father's. Realizing that Dio had poisoned his father, and was now poisoning George Joestar to get at the family fortune, Jonathan only allowed a select group of doctors to treat his father. Jonathan confronted Dio about the poison medicine, however Dio refused to admit that it was poison. Jonathan planned to take the poison to a local university, and have them analyze it in order to find the antidote. While they would be unable to discern the type of poison it was, they were able to identify it as coming from somewhere in Asia. Jonathan heard that a man on Ogre Street sold Asian medicines, and went to investigate him. While on Ogre Street, Jonathan would fight with the gangster Robert E.O. Speedwagon, ultimately defeating him and gaining his respect by holding back from permanently injuring him during their fight. Speedwagon would lead Jonathan to the shop of Wang Chan, the man who had sold Dio the poison. Wang Chan did little to hide the fact he had sold the poison to Dio, and even agreed to come back to testify he had done so. While Jonathan was away, Dio began to panic at the possibility that his schemes would be undone. He even began to drink heavily upon hearing Jonathan would be returning from Ogre Street. He planned to do away with Jonathan when he returned by forcing the mask onto him and getting blood onto it. While Dio knew about the stone barbs, he didn't realize the real effect they would have. Before Jonathan's return, Dio wanted to ensure that the mask would be fatal before trying it on him. Dio knew that any attempt on Jonathan's life that didn't kill him quickly would be disastrous for Dio, as Jonathan would be able to overpower him. In addition, he needed Jonathan's death to appear to be an accident in order for him to inherit the family fortune. By using the mask, it would appear to have been an accident that occurred during Jonathan's research. While drinking in the city, Dio attacked a pair of drunks, killing one while forcing the mask onto the other. He found that the mask worked as he believed it would, with the stone barbs thrusting into the man's brain and killing him. However, he did not expect the mask to emit a dazzling light and transform the man into a vampire only minutes after he fell dead. With the power of the mask, the vampire was able to easily overpower Dio, nearly draining his blood and killing him. Fortunately for Dio, the sun rose during this and turned the vampire to dust. Collecting the mask, Dio would return to the Joestar Manor with a new plan in mind. When Dio returned, Jonathan would be waiting for him. He confronted Dio with proof of his plans to poison George Joestar. Speedwagon and George Joestar himself would also confront Dio over his plans, turning him over to the police. Feigning guilt, Dio said that he had come back planning to turn himself into the police, and asked that Jonathan be the one to handcuff him. As Jonathan approached Dio pulled a knife and the stone mask from his clothes, planning to kill Jonathan and use the mask to turn himself into a vampire. George Joestar pushed himself between Dio and Jonathan, taking the knife meant for his son. Dio would wipe his adopted father's blood on the mask, activating the spikes moments before the police would shoot him multiple times. George Joestar would die shortly afterwards, asking Jonathan to bury Dio next to Dario and not to hold a grudge against the man. Almost immediately after George Joestar's death, Dio would rise as a vampire. He would kill the policeman in a matter of seconds, as well as badly injuring Speedwagon. Jonathan battled Dio, though Dio shrugged off bullets, spear blows, and even fire. During the fight between the two, Jonathan would set fire to the Joestar Manor, hoping to trap Dio in the burning building to ensure that he would be killed. He lured Dio higher and higher into the mansion, before grabbing hold of him and forcing him to fall towards the entryway of the home. While Dio would break many of the bones in Jonathan's body, Jonathan was still able to throw him from one of the higher levels of the home. Dio would fall onto a statue at the entrance of the home, impaled through the chest by a long spear that it held. Jonathan would leave him to perish in the flames, escaping with Speedwagon. After the fight, Jonathan and Speedwagon went to recover from their ordeal. Wang Chan lingered behind, and the day after began to rummage through the smoldering ruins of the home. After discovering the mask, he was attacked by the nearly dead Dio, and turned into a zombie by the vampire. Over the next 3 days, Jonathan would lie in bed at a nearby hospital, recovering from the wounds and burns from his fight with Dio. While recovering, he would be reunited with his childhood friend Irina, who nursed him back to health. While Jonathan was being nursed back to health, Dio and Wang Chan traveled to Whitechapel. At this time, Jack the Ripper was performing his infamous killings. Dio was interested in finding powerful men with ill intent to serve him. With the powers granted to him by the mask, he would convince Jack the Ripper to join him, and would turn him into one of his undead servants, the second of many. Once able to move on his own, Jonathan went back to the ruins of his home, hoping to find the stone mask and ensure that no other vampires would be created. While there, he encountered William Antonio Zeppeli, who had become a baron by this time. Baron Zeppeli wished to teach Jonathan about the art of Hammond, and recruit him in his quest to destroy the mask and its creations. Speedwagon and Jonathan eagerly joined Zeppeli in his quest to hunt down the mask, and after several weeks of training, would travel to Widnight's Lot, a small town south of London. While there, the group would face many of Dio's zombies. Jack the Ripper would attack them in the tunnel leading to the village, while other zombies waited for them further inside. The three of them would defeat a powerful pair of zombies, though at the cost of Baron Zeppeli's life. While Zeppeli had called for other Hammond users, Strizo, Dyer, and even his master Tonpetty to join them, they would arrive too late to save Zeppeli. The group confronted Dio in his lair within the castle overlooking Widnight's Lot. While Dyer would be killed fighting Dio, Jonathan would be able to force a great deal of ripple energy into Dio as he hurled him from the top of the castle, causing Dio's body to break apart as it fell. However, this wouldn't even be enough to stop Dio. Before the ripple energy could completely destroy him, he severed his own head to stop the ripple energy from reaching his brain, and waited for Wang Chan to recover him. While Dio would barely survive as a severed head, Jonathan and the others believed this terror was finally put to rest. The group would destroy the stone mask, and cremate Zeppeli's remains before leaving the village. Jonathan would return home, planning to marry Irina. In January of 1889, they would board a ship heading to America, planning to start their life together. At the same time, Wang Chan smuggled Dio's remains onto the same ship, intending to kill Jonathan. Dio planned to replace his body with Jonathan's, and live on with his rival's body. While Dio and Wang Chan were able to gravely wound Jonathan, he was still able to destroy Wang Chan and use his body to stop the engine of the ship. Jonathan planned to destroy the ship, allowing Irina enough time to escape, while taking Dio to the bottom of the ocean. Jonathan held onto Dio's severed head, even as the ship was engulfed in flames. Irina managed to escape with a baby girl that had been left behind on the ship. The two of them hid in the casket that Dio had used to sneak onto the ship. The casket would allow them to float to safety, and served as a makeshift boat while they waited for rescue. They wouldn't wait for long, as they were rescued by a passing ship, and Irina and the baby girl headed on to America. While Dio would not perish in the flames, he would sink to the ocean floor with Jonathan's body. I think that will be all that we have time for today. Tomorrow we'll go over the lives of Irina's adopted child, the Hammond user Strizo, Baron Zeppeli's son Caesar, and Jonathan Joestar's grandson Joseph Joestar. Make sure to finish the Battle Tendency arc of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and hopefully start on Stardust Crusaders, as we'll have plenty to talk about next class. If you have any questions, please feel free to send an email to fictionalhistory101@gmail.com, or you can tweet at us at fichist101. Thank you again for joining us in class today, and please don't forget to study. The intro and outro music for this class is Labyrinth by Enrico Altavia, courtesy of freesoundtrackmusic.com. Thanks again for listening to today's class. I've been kind of thinking about doing a couple of JoJo episodes for a little while, and I'm hoping that there's quite a bit to cover. Phantom Blood went on a little longer than I expected to, but not quite enough to make it to 2 episodes. But we'll see how long Battle Tendency and then Stardust Crusaders goes on for. I expect Stardust Crusaders to be quite a long one. So we'll see how many episodes this runs for, but if you have any comments, feel free to email me at fictionalhistory101@gmail.com, or go ahead and rate, leave a review, however it is you want to say I'm doing great, bad, whatever comments you might have. Thanks again for listening, and have a great night.